Hello, AP History students. This is Mr. Claus. I'm here to introduce you to the short answer question, specifically short answer question number 1, which will be based on a secondary source or possibly multiple secondary sources. As a quick reminder of the structure of the AP exam, the short answer questions come after the multiple choice in the first half of the test. A point worth considering is the fact that the short answer question ends this session. So it's one that you have exactly 40 minutes to work on. You can't start it early, nor can you continue it later on. So 40 minutes is the number you will have, which does give you some freedom to go back and brush up earlier answers if you need to. This question that I'm going to do in this video is the first short answer question, which will be a secondary source, meaning it will be a document by a historian somewhat after the fact of whatever they're writing about. It is mandatory. You don't get a choice. You get what you get. A quick reminder on strategies for all short answer questions. First of all, the recommended pacing. You have 3 questions to do, but remember that each of those 3 questions will probably have 3 sub-questions. It might have more or fewer, but usually 3. And so that gives you basically 9 sub-questions to do, 9 mini tasks to complete. And then as well as that, another time-consuming factor is that for questions number 1 and 2, you will have a document to read. And so that gives us 11 little tasks to accomplish in our 40 minutes. And so if we do all the math, what that means is that we have about 3.5 minutes per task. And that, I think, should be helpful. You should be able to watch the countdown as it goes. Also, it means you don't have to rush certain things. I think students sometimes try to rush through the reading of the document, for instance. Like, you have 3 or 4 minutes to look at it and should spend, if not that long, at least a good solid chunk so you make sure you really understand it. Even and especially if it's a visual source, which it's unlikely to be, admittedly, for question 1, but you might get one later. Anyway, in terms of the pacing of your work, you will start with 40 minutes on the clock with the digital exam. That means that you should be wrapping up question 1 and starting question 2 at around the 26-minute mark. You should be wrapping up 2 and starting 3 or 4 at around the 12-minute mark. And you should, in theory, have 2 or 3 minutes left to proofread and make sure everything is as you want it. You can pause here if you need to read these over, but in brief, the task verb identify can be a single sentence. I recommend a second sentence of explanation just because the AP World readers one year held students to a higher standard than that was published. But identify is the one that you can be relatively brief and straightforward, although still need to be specific. Describe and explain are similar in the level of what they're asking you to do, and similar in the length of the response you should have. Probably 3 or 4 sentences. To describe is to provide the relevant characteristics of a specified topic. To explain, usually you're taking 2 things and identifying a relationship between those things. So if you need to pause and check these things out, you can do so, but I'm going to move along. Reminder that nearly every SAQ prompt will ask you to identify, explain, or describe one thing. And some years they've even put that 1 in all caps. 1 means 1. You need to whatever it is it's asking about, you need to identify the one best piece of evidence that you want to talk about, and then you need to explain or describe that piece of evidence in detail. Do not try to insert more than 1. Often students feel sort of lukewarm about 1, so they'll say 3 or 4 different things and hope that one of them sticks. As soon as you start talking about a second thing, a second response to this question, the AP reader will ignore what you're writing as though it were not there, because you're off topic, and this looks really bad for you because you got to choose the topic. So choose your best thing, the thing that you know the most about, talk about it, and stay in that lane. A few traps to avoid. Often, particularly in question 1, there'll be a phrase that mentions the source or something in the source or in paragraph number 2 of the source. Don't get fooled by skimming that. You need to read the question very closely. Often what it's telling you need to do is to understand a claim or something that is in the source, but then to what you really have to do is to support that claim in the source with some information from outside the source with your own knowledge. You can look for the word would, one piece of evidence that would support the claim made in paragraph 1. What that means is it doesn't support the claim made in paragraph 1. It isn't in the source. It would support it if you introduced it, and that's what you need to do is introduce it. Okay, so if you get a question that is a prompt that is truly in the source, it will usually be prompt A. Often it'll ask you in prompt A to kind of identify one claim or main the passage or something like that. But I would say that probably 70% is my rough guess of short answer prompts require showing knowledge that isn't actually in the source. So this is not a seek and find activity for the most part. Usually you need to understand the source and add in your outside knowledge to have success on these. All right. Also, avoid having too much emphasis on your own personal opinion. So you're going to be reading secondary source material, which means historians, and they're generally going to pick a historian who's saying something interesting, possibly even outlandish, and asking you to kind of wrestle with it. The prompt is never, or at least I've never seen one, that asks what you actually think about the claim that's being made. It's going to assign you a position, what's one piece of evidence that would support this claim, and or what's one piece of evidence that would go against this claim, but it will never ask you what you actually think. So don't end up, unless the prompt is new this year and one that I've never seen, don't end up arguing for or against the prompt based on your actual opinion. You can in your mind, of course, but that's not usually what the prompt is going to ask. Okay, the process you want to follow, start by reading that sourcing information, who wrote this and to whom and what's it in and when was it written and that sort of thing. Then read the prompts. So you know what you are looking for as you read, and then read that source really, really carefully. You don't have a lot of time here, so you don't want to end up, if you have to reread the sources, that's an extra 6 minutes or so that's going to take you. So you don't want to do that. And if in doubt, if you're real confused about, you read the source and it just doesn't make a ton of sense to you, one place that you may be able to look a little harder would be the last line of the source. Remember that the AP readers are really abridging much larger sources to give you the documents for this activity. And it always seems to me that, they can cut those off whenever they want to. So whatever the last line is, they thought it would help you. They thought it would be useful to you. So, because otherwise, if it was just superfluous, they would have cut that line too. So if in doubt, take a good look at that last line and see if that helps you kind of get the gist of the document, because it was included on purpose. Okay, now I want to give you some of the frequently used prompt formats that you get. To put this together, I went through, years of old AP exams and just tried to kind of categorize what are the questions that they're likely to ask you, so that you can kind of be on alert for what you might see. Okay. Often prompt A, the easiest one or most straightforward one that you can get, is just identify a claim made in the source. They do this a lot. I would say maybe 50% of years, this is like prompt A of at least one of them. So just straight up, what is a claim that the author makes? You don't have to defend it or attack it. You don't have to state your opinion on it. You just have to identify it. You cannot just copy the words, put it in your own words, explain it in your own words, and you might want to add a sentence of further clarification, but pretty straightforward. They may direct you to, a claim made in the second paragraph or the source, or they may say, find a claim that the author makes regarding, social things, so like those grapiest topics in the society. But bottom line, all you got to do is identify one. Should be pretty easy if you get one of those, but again, be precise, be specific. For a claim made in the source, identify a piece of evidence that the author uses. That's another one that they'll do. So instead of identifying the claim, you identify a piece of evidence. Obviously, you'll also need to know what the claim is. So that's another one that they do with some frequency. Sometimes they will offer you two sources. AP World, it doesn't happen too often, although I have seen it. AP US and AP Euro, they often give you two different historians talking about the same subject, more or less, and they'll ask you to identify a difference in the claims made by the sources or a similarity made in the sources. And again, possibly in a certain paragraph, possibly regarding a certain topic, but not But just again, you just have to kind of identify and understand the two claims, and then note a similarity or a difference. As far as like harder prompts or more challenging prompts, and the prompts do tend to get harder. A is usually easier than B, which is easier than C in general. So these are ones that are going to call for you to use outside information. So for a claim made in the source, use your knowledge to identify and describe a piece of evidence that would support it. And again, that word would is your like cue here, that it doesn't support it because it's not in the source, but you're introducing a piece of evidence that would support it. And then you'll need to like explain it in detail, offer some detailed information about it. You may be asked the opposite of that as well, a piece of evidence that would undermine it. Sometimes they'll use the word complicate it, but basically or even a limitation of it. So asking you to kind of challenge the source, not because you mean it in your heart, but because that's the position you've been assigned. Another model for historical development described in the source. So again, we see that phrase in the source, but it means we have to understand the historical development described there. Then use your knowledge to explain how it was similar to a historical development in this period. So another thing that's going on that kind of unwinds in a certain way. You may also get the inverse of that, and proving how it was different from another historical development in this period. Or we could, it may ask you not so much about this period, but later. So for a historical development described in the source, again, using your knowledge to explain a specific impact that it had on later historical developments. So it could ask you essentially like, what came before and caused the thing in the prompt? What's a similar thing to what's going on in the prompt? What's a thing that the prompt was the cause of later? There's a lot of that. And those are really the formats you're likely to see. So just read carefully, be on the alert for those, although, it's not necessarily going to fall into those categories, but looking at several years of AP tests, that's usually the sorts of stuff they're going to ask you. Okay, some quick general advice for all SAQs if you're about to write this one, although it applies to all short answer questions. As you know, your responses may be brief. You only have 3-ish minutes per prompt. And the AP readers know this. They don't expect a book. They don't expect a long essay. And in fact, it's wasting time if you write like a full page on these things. They expect brevity, but you may not be vague. You have to be specific. If it asks a question about like what's one piece of evidence that would support this, you got to name names and places and details, and don't talk in vague terms. And likewise, if you're supposed to be using the document to demonstrate something, you need to like use the document, use a word that the author uses or a little phrase that they use. This is especially true, and even true if it's a visual source. So you might get a picture or something. You need to reference specific details in the image. These AP readers are AP history teachers. This is what they do for a living. Most of them have been doing it for years. They don't let rookies be AP readers. And so they know if you're faking it. Like they spend their whole year with the radar up watching for students faking knowledge. So you got to show your historical knowledge and or your skills as a historian in order to impress them. These are the people that I grabbed. I think I Googled cranky old person, but this is who I want you to picture grading your essays. They don't fall for, fluff. They don't fall for, fake knowledge or that sort of thing. Like they know their history and they're willing to give you the credit if you prove you know it too, but they're not going to be fooled. So write for them, write to impress them. Okay. Make sure you read the prompt really carefully. I'll say in class often, like the road to success on a short answer question is actually a really short road. There's only a few sentences to write. So it's not like a long and arduous, longer essay, but it's very easy to choose the wrong road. And if you choose the wrong road, it doesn't matter how quickly you get to the end of it. You won't be where you wanted to be. Read the prompt carefully. Let every word of the prompt register in your mind. A lot of students will miss points because a prompt says talk about a political impact and you talk about a social impact or something like that. Every single word matters. So once you really have the prompt, then respond to the prompt, the whole prompt, and nothing but the prompt. stay dialed in there. The usual acronym stolen from Heimler is making T. So always start with a topic sentence that kind of reuses the words of the prompt. This is not like plagiarizing or copying. What you're doing is you're forcing yourself to stay on task. So reuse the verbiage of the prompt, and in the end of that sentence, introduce like the one thing you want to talk about as a response to the prompt. Give some details then about that evidence, whatever one thing you chose. Show off the breadth of your knowledge of that. If the topic sentence is sort of, introducing a word that would be on the front of a flashcard, the explanation of evidence is like, what are those bullets on the back of the flashcard? What are the details about that particular thing? And then your analysis is simply, doing the logical leap of how does that evidence support or prove your topic sentence? So how does this prove that or support that? And that's the whole deal. This is the little slide that I use in class often. Maybe you want to use it now if you're practicing at home. And I wish you luck on your short answer question number 1 related to secondary sources, historians interpreting the past.